Thanks for clicking today's video. If you can, hit subscribe. It really helps the channel. Now let's get back to the story. The sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered planks of an old wooden fence, where rusty barbed wire twisted around posts like a snake ready to strike. Hank stood, his heart heavy as he watched his cattle meander through the broken barrier and onto the neighboring field. The land stretched out before him, a quilt of dusty browns and greens under the harsh afternoon light. His stomach knotted at the thought of the confrontation that lay ahead, a confrontation with a man he'd rather never see again. Hank knew too well what was at stake. If Clay Harper, his embittered neighbor from childhood, decided to make this incident official, the fines could be ruinous. The farm, a legacy passed down through generations, teetered on the precipice of disaster. The cattle, his lifeline and inheritance, grazed innocently across the boundary, oblivious to the weight of their owner's imminent threat. The fields that divided the two men were a silent testament to years of rivalry and unresolved grudges. Hank had inherited his patch of land from his father, much like Clay had from his own. Their father's disputes were legendary, etched into the memory of every man in the county. Now it seemed those old ghosts had returned to haunt the present. Hank squinted against the glare of the sun, the brim of his sweat-stained Stetson shading his eyes. The farm-all tractor stood idle in the barn, its engine silent. The hayloft smelled of dried grass and oil, a comforting scent that seemed miles away from the anxiety gnawing at his insides. Every piece of equipment, from the John Deere combine to the rusting plow, was a testament to years of labor and sacrifice, years that could be unraveled with a single report to the county. He ran a rough, calloused hand over the stubble of his jaw, tracing lines of worry etched deeper by the day. The corrugated iron roof of the barn glinted in the sunlight, a beacon of his past and his uncertain future. With each step, he took closer to the boundary. The more the memories surfaced, Clay's smirking face from days long gone, the childish taunts that had somehow evolved into adult grudges. The air was thick with the hum of cicadas, and a hawk circled high above in the azure sky, a lone sentinel bearing witness to the unfolding drama below. Hank's boots kicked up little clouds of dust as he neared the breach in the fence, where the barbed wire had snapped like an old bone. This was no simple fix. It was a symbol of the discord between him and Clay, a discord that had waited, festering, for the slightest breach to erupt. The cattle roamed the neighboring grass, oblivious to the lines drawn by men. Hank's mind raced with the implications. How many head had crossed? Insurance for 10 cows, 30 at most. If Clay were to tally them up, claim damages, Hank would be done for. The fines alone could cripple him, and the thought of losing even one of his Holsteins sent a chill down his spine. Something must have distracted him, this lapse that had allowed his cattle to wander. The old wound of Clay's inheritance threatened to ooze anew as Hank pondered the land dispute that haunted both their families. Even as boys, they had fought over boundaries. Now those lines held the weight of survival. The fence needed mending, and fast, before the sun dipped lower and the shadows stretched ominously across the fields. But more than wire and wood needed repair. Hank knew a conversation was due, one that had been delayed far too long. Yet the idea of approaching Clay was like stepping into a den of rattlesnakes, the possibility of venomous words hanging heavily in the air. Why now? Why this summer, when drought had already tightened its grip on the land and every decision felt like a gamble? Hank's mind churned with questions, each more unsettling than the last. His feet carried him forward, the instinct to reclaim what was his overriding the dread coiling in his gut. He had to act before Clay saw, before the old grudges grew teeth. As the sun melted into the horizon, Hank's shadow stretched long across the field, blending with those of the cattle. He felt the weight of time, the heavy pull of history. The fence was more than a barrier. It was a testament to the lives lived on either side. And as he neared the broken line, he could sense the silent challenge it posed, daring him to step forward and face the past. One thing was certain. Tomorrow would demand more than mending. It would require a reckoning, the kind that could either dissolve old enmities or forge them in iron. The open question lingered in the evening air. Could the land that divided them also become the ground that united them? Hank learned the ways of the land from his grandfather, a man as tough as the soil he tilled. It was said old Thomas had hands like iron and a heart stubborn as a mule. In the early mornings, long before the first trace of light stretched across the horizon, Hank would trail behind him, clutching a battered lunch pail and wearing boots a size too big. The old man spoke in gruff, clipped sentences, his voice a constant rumble, like the distant thunder of summer storms. From him, Hank inherited more than just the farm. He gleaned the rhythms of life that ebbed and flowed with the seasons. He learned to read the sky for weather, to coax growth from the most reluctant soil, and to listen to the cattle as if they were kin. It was Thomas who taught him that a man's worth was scrawled in calluses and sweat stains, not in the whispers of townsfolk or the size of a wallet. But all this wisdom came with a price. Thomas had always been at odds with Clay's father, Albert Harper, a bull of a man with a penchant for old grudges. Their disputes were the stuff of local legend, and Hank could recall countless summer evenings punctuated by the sound of raised voices spilling over from the Harper land. Disputes that left their mark on Hank, shaping his wariness of Clay from a young age. The land was a testament to this history, every acre a chapter in the old men's ongoing saga. Hank had often wondered if the earth itself remembered the arguments, if the grass leaned away from the place where harsh words had been sown so many years ago. Yet despite the shadow of discord, he remained tethered by duty and love to the farm his grandfather had entrusted to him. It wasn't just the farm, though. Thomas had left Hank a legacy of resilience, an unyielding spirit forged in the furnace of hard times. But with it came the weight of expectations, the unspoken demand to preserve the land and keep the family name untarnished. His grandfather had often said, "The land gives what you put into it." Hank feared he hadn't put enough of himself into it lately. As Hank approached the broken fence, those lessons echoed in his mind, each footstep stirring old memories. But despite the knowledge passed down, the present challenge felt insurmountable. He felt the burden of his grandfather's legacy pressing down upon his shoulders, relentless as the sun overhead. This summer had been one of the hardest, the drought stealing away what little security the land provided. The split in the fence seemed larger now, a gaping maw threatening to swallow what he had left. Hank reached the boundary, a stomach-churning sense of inevitability filling him. He needed to act, yet the thought of confronting Clay was like reliving all the old stories of hostility and clashing wills. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows that stretched across the fields like fingers reaching for the past. Hank squatted beside the breach, running his hand along the wood, feeling the grain and noting the splinters where the wire had snapped. The fence had been strong once, like the bond between the families before time and pride had eroded it to nothing. He stood up, determination settling in his bones. As he surveyed the scene, a low rumble of an engine pulled his attention to the horizon. Clay's old pickup truck appeared, a dust cloud trailing behind it like a flag of impending confrontation. Hank's heart quickened. This was no random encounter. Clay had seen the cattle and was coming to stake his claim. As the pickup halted in a plume of dust, Clay emerged, silhouetted against the evening sky. His frame was lean but sturdy, like a fence post driven deep into the earth. The years had etched lines into his face, each one a testament to the harsh life they both shared. Clay removed his hat, ran a hand through thinning hair, and approached with the gait of a man begrudgingly resigned to fate. "Got yourself a problem there, Hank," Clay called out, his voice carrying on the slight breeze. His words were not quite an accusation, but they held an edge sharp enough to cut. Hank forced a smile, one that felt awkward and brittle. "Seems these old fences don't hold like they used to." Clay surveyed the cattle, now scattered across the field, and nodded. "Yep, seems that way." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken history. "Thought you might want to round them up, for someone makes a fuss." "I was just about to do that." Hank's voice was calm, but his mind was racing. The unspoken implication was clear. Clay could report him, and Hank would face the consequences. Yet there was something else under Clay's words, a tension that went beyond the cattle. "Fences go down all the time, Hank. They don't fix themselves, though." Clay's eyes were steady, his expression unreadable. He rocked back on his heels, the dust swirling around his boots. "You trying to tell me something, Clay?" Hank asked, wary of where this was leading. Clay glanced back at his truck, a flicker of something, worry, resignation, crossing his face. "County's been sniffing around, Hank. They're looking for reasons to make things difficult. You know how they are." Hank frowned. "They after you for something?" "Nothing I can't handle," Clay replied, but his tone carried a heaviness that belied his words. "Just saying, sometimes it pays to be neighborly." There it was, the hint of an olive branch buried under layers of history and mistrust. Hank hesitated, the urge to snap back tempered by the knowledge that Clay might be in trouble just as deep as his own. "The land don't care who owns it, Clay," Hank finally said, meeting the other man's gaze. "It's us who have to draw the lines." Clay nodded slowly, as if weighing each word. "Ain't that the truth? Maybe it's time for more than just mending fences." The implication was clear, yet translating that into action felt like an insurmountable bridge to cross. Hank knew the land better than most, but navigating human pride and history was another matter entirely. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of copper and shadow, Hank caught a glimpse of something familiar in Clay's eyes, a weariness that mirrored his own, a shared understanding born of similar struggles and a common land. The cattle were beginning to drift back toward the breach, as if sensing the stirring changes in the air. Hank knew he had to move fast, to gather them up before the night cloaked the fields in darkness. "Let's get these creatures back where they belong, Clay," Hank said, extending a hand not just to guide, but to mend, to rebuild what the years had torn asunder. Clay accepted the gesture with a firm grip, and together they set about the task at hand. Yet even as they worked side by side, a question lingered in Hank's mind, one as pressing as the demands of the land itself. Could this tentative collaboration grow into something more enduring than a summer's resolve? And what hidden struggles lay silently beneath Clay's steady exterior, waiting for their own reckoning? These questions remained unanswered, hanging in the cool air of dusk, as the two men shepherded their futures back across the fence line. Hank and Clay worked side by side, coaxing the cattle back through the gap in the fence. The sun was a burnt orange smudge on the horizon, casting a warm light over the fields, as if nature itself held its breath at the unfolding reconciliation. The tension between the two men was palpable, an unspoken accord hanging in the heavy summer air. As they shepherded the last of the cattle, Hank noticed something about Clay's demeanor, his eyes scanning the horizon, not with the satisfaction of a resolved feud, but with the weight of an unseen burden. It was more than a neighborly gesture. driving Clay's sudden willingness to cooperate. Hank wiped the sweat from his brow, the gritty salt of effort mingling with the dust of the day. His mind danced around the conversation they had danced through, the hints Clay had dropped, the county, the troubles. They were more than just whispers on the wind. As he tightened a length of barbed wire, he decided to breach the silence that had settled between them. "Clay," he began, his voice low, "what's really going on with the county? You mentioned they've been after you." Clay paused, holding a strand of wire taut in his hands, his eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the boundary. He seemed to wrestle with an internal debate, the muscles in his jaw working as he considered his response. "They're sniffing around, trying to find reasons to take the land," Clay finally admitted, the words escaping like a reluctant confession. "Bank's breathing down my neck, and it won't be long before they move in if something don't change." The revelation hit Hank like a punch to the gut. All this time, the enemy he thought he faced wasn't just old resentment, but a shared threat that loomed over both their heads. He immediately saw the irony in their situation. Divided by old grudges, yet united by the same ruthless bureaucracy threatening to uproot their lives. "Damn," Hank muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Pride, I guess," Clay replied, a rueful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Ain't easy asking for help from someone who might not give it." The air was thick with the scent of earth and impending rain, a promise of relief from the drought that had sapped the land of its vitality. Hank considered the shared weight of their predicaments, the legacy of survival that bound them more tightly than any barbed wire ever could. "We could join forces," Hank suggested, the idea forming fully as he spoke. "Consolidate what we have. It might be enough to keep both our heads above water." Clay turned to look at Hank, his expression one of cautious hope. "You think that'd work?" "Worth a shot," Hank said with a shrug. "Besides, cattle don't care who pastures them, as long as there's grass to graze." There was a moment of silence, punctuated by the soft lowing of cattle settling in for the night. It was an offer that carried risk, but also the potential for something stronger than pride, a partnership grounded in necessity. Clay nodded slowly, the weight of years seeming to lift slightly from his shoulders. "I reckon it could be." Hank felt a spark of determination reignite inside him, a resolve to not just survive, but to transform the challenges into new beginnings. The fence between their lands, once a symbol of division, now stood as an emblem of potential collaboration. As they continued to mend the fence, the first drops of rain began to fall, large and heavy. The smell of wet earth rose, filling the air with a freshness that promised renewal. Hank embraced the discomfort, knowing that with every challenge there came an opportunity for growth. The cattle were restless, sensing the changing weather, and Clay and Hank worked with renewed vigor, urgency driving their movements. The rhythm of their work, cutting, twisting, pounding, was a balm to the old wounds, a melody of progress that drowned out the past's discordant notes. With the fence secured and the landscape bathed in the soft glow of rain-drenched twilight, Hank and Clay stood shoulder to shoulder, their shared endeavor laying the foundation for a different future. The rain fell steadily now, a cleansing cascade that washed away the dust and grime of the long day. Clay glanced sideways at Hank, a grin breaking through the seriousness of the moment. "Maybe this summer ain't so ruined after all." Hank smiled back, the tension between them easing into an understanding that transcended their history. "Guess we'll see." Yet beneath the newfound camaraderie, Hank felt a pang of loss, a relinquishing of the fierce independence that had defined him for so long. He realized that to gain something new, he had to let go of the old, a price he was now willing to pay. As they walked back to their respective homes, the rain continued to fall, each drop a promise of the coming season. The land, soaked and glistening, whispered its own hope for renewal, a testament to the resilience of those who tilled its soil. In the stillness of the evening, the fields lay waiting, a canvas upon which new stories would be written. The past had been a harsh teacher, but beneath its lessons lay the promise of a future unburdened by old feuds. For Hank and Clay, the summer that began with a ruined fence now stretched into one of cautious optimism, their partnership a beacon against the encroaching shadows of uncertainty. Quietly, the rain fell, and the cattle settled down, lulled by the promise of a new day. In the months that followed, the alliance between Hank and Clay grew from an uneasy truce into a robust partnership. They combined their herds, pooling resources to better navigate the financial challenges that had threatened to sweep them under. The summer rains revived the parched earth, and the fields bloomed with the promise of plenty, as if in gratitude for their resolve. Hank found himself working Clay's land as much as his own, the division between their properties dissolving into shared responsibility and mutual benefit. Each day began early and ended late, but now there was a camaraderie that lightened the load. They mended fences together, not just of wood and wire, but of understanding and shared purpose. The community watched with a mixture of surprise and approval as the age-old rivalry gave way to cooperation. Hank and Clay's decision to work together inspired others in the area to reassess their own feuds and grudges. Neighbors who had been distant now found themselves reconsidering old animosities in favor of collaboration. The threat of foreclosure that had once loomed over both men was averted. By pooling their resources, they managed to meet the bank's demands, securing their hold on the land that had shaped their lives. The cattle thrived on the combined pastures, their numbers slowly increasing, offering a semblance of security and hope. As the seasons turned, the two men found a rhythm that was both practical and efficient. Clay's initial reluctance to ask for help was replaced by gratitude and respect for Hank's willingness to bridge the divide. Similarly, Hank discovered that letting go of old prejudices opened the door to new friendships and opportunities. Years passed, and the scars of past conflicts faded, replaced by the lines of experience and growth. Hank's farm, once on the brink of dissolution, flourished. The fields were a patchwork of golden green, a testament to the labor of two men who had learned to value cooperation over conflict. In the quiet moments, Hank often thought of his grandfather, of the lessons imparted through backbreaking work and shared meals. He understood now that Thomas' fierce independence had been as much a strength as a burden. To grow, he had to embrace not just the land, but the people who shared it. One autumn day, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, Hank and Clay stood by the fence they had rebuilt together. The wood was solid under their touch, reinforced not just with nails and wire, but with trust and mutual respect. The air was crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of cattle lowing as they settled into the pasture for the night. Hank watched the horizon, where the last light of day painted the sky in hues of pink and orange. A sense of peace settled over him, the kind that comes from knowing you've done right by your family and your land. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Clay watching the same sunset, the lines of worry that had once etched his face now smoothed by the promise of tomorrow. As the years continued their inexorable march, Hank and Clay's partnership remained a cornerstone of their lives, a testament to the power of reconciliation and shared purpose. The land, ever faithful, responded to their care with abundance, nurturing the cattle and crops that sustained them. In the end, it was the simple things that defined their success, the rhythm of the seasons, the companionship found in shared labor, and the richness of a life lived close to the earth. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, emerging stronger for having faced them together. One evening, as the last rays of the sun kissed the earth, Hank stood by the fence, his shadow long and familiar on the ground. The air was cool, carrying the scent of hay and distant rain. He glanced to his side, where Clay's silhouette mirrored his. There was no need for words, for the fence they had mended was more than just a boundary. It was a testament to the enduring spirit of those who live by the land. And as the twilight deepened, the two men stood in silent camaraderie, watching as their shadows blended into one, a simple image of unity that would endure long after the sun had set.